and welcome to the Australia-India Innovate Forums hosted in partnership with EduGrowth and the International Institute of Information Technology, Bangalore. I'm Associate Professor Priya Rangan, Principal Consultant for Government Projects at the Australia-India Institute. I'm speaking today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge all Indigenous people joining us for this forum today. This series is designed to bring together experts from both Australia and India to explore digital learning trends, challenges, and opportunities. We will be hosting 3 webinars and 2 roundtables, one in Melbourne and one in Delhi. Today's forum is the second in our series and will explore the topic of the digital classroom, a leadership perspective. It is now my pleasure to hand over to our moderator and key partner for the series, Professor V. Sridhar. Sridhar is a professor at the Center for Information Technology and Public Policy at the IIITB, specializing in communications technology, management, and regulation. Over to you, Sridhar.
Thank you, Priya. Thanks for the introduction. So in the second of the series of webinars that we have been conducting as part of the Australia-India Innovate Forum, our expert panel here will look at how leaders in various universities and institutes in Australia and India strategize for embracing digital classrooms and online learning, especially in higher education space. So that will be the focus of this particular webinar. So I would like to introduce you to the expert speakers of today. So first is Professor R. Chandrasekhar. We fondly call him as Professor RC. He is the Dean of Academics at the International Institute of Information Technology, Bangalore, India. And Professor RC is the Dean of Academics, and he has been teaching and conducting research over 15 years with more than 25 years of experience in the field of computing in various roles in both the industry and academia. So he contributes to diverse areas of study and practice. He also is primary research interest being technology and education. So welcome, Professor Chandrasekhar.
Hello, everyone.
Then we have the Deakin Distinguished Professor Liz Johnson, who heads Deakin's Education and Employability Strategy, focusing on premium digital learning and outstanding student experience. So as a Deputy Vice Chancellor Education from 2019 to 2021, Professor Johnson steered teaching and learning at Deakin through the COVID-19 pandemic, enhancing Deakin's online learning, teaching innovation, course development, and staff capability for learning and teaching. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you very much, Sridhar. Lovely to be here.
Thank you. Next is Dr. Vitomir Kovanovic. Is an associate professor at the University of South Australia's Education Futures and Associate Director of Research of Excellence and Communication at the Center for Change and Complexity in Learning. His primary research interests are in learning analytics and artificial intelligence in education, with a particular focus on developing approaches for measuring the development of complex skills and competencies. Welcome, Vitomir.
Thank you so much.
And the last but not the least, Professor Padma M. Sarangapani is a professor of education and chair of the Center of Excellence in Teacher Education at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, India. She has worked in the area of the use of ICT for teacher professional development in under-resourced context of India and the Global South, and has led technology integration into higher education teaching at her institute. Padma, welcome to the webinar. So In fact, we are in the right time to discuss about leadership in digital classroom and online learning, because the COVID pandemic has really changed the landscape in higher education from a completely in-person campus setting to various forms, including completely online and hybrid modes of classroom interaction and delivery. So the learners and instructors have embraced the challenge and have been continuously adapting themselves to this particular disruptive change. So it is in this particular context that we want to explore various strategies and initiatives taken by senior leaders and educators at universities, both in India and Australia, to embrace the new model of teaching and learning. So we will start with some questions from my end. And of course, we'll go through a couple of rounds. And then after that, the panel will be open to take questions from the audience. So the first, to kickstart the deliberations, I'd like to invite Liz and Professor RC and Professor Liz to discuss briefly about the following question. So let's begin by asking how your respective universities and institutions have been strategizing on integrating the online program, juxtaposing them with the traditional in-person on-campus program. I'm sure that you would have found it very, very challenging. So I would like to hear from you first, Liz, and then RC. Over to you, Liz.
Thanks, Sridhar. It's a really, as you say, very pertinent topic. It's particularly important for my university because we're a distributed university. Deakin's quite big. It's got about 60,000 students. And we're across 4 campuses here in the southeastern corner of Australia in Victoria. But about a quarter of our students study with us online. And that was true pre-pandemic. So Deakin started with a mission in distance education, and it translated that pretty promptly into an online learning delivery mode. So we were oriented towards students who weren't in the classroom with you for a long time, but we had been doing that in parallel for a long time. So here was the on-campus students and here were the online students. And in that 5-10 years before the COVID-19 pandemic, they started to blur together. And the reason that that happened, the strategic reason that happened, was because students were wanted to choose to mix modes because it made their lives more flexible. When COVID-19 pandemic finally arrived, despite what you might think, it was just as disruptive for us as it was for everyone else. In fact, Victoria was one of the most locked down places in the world. We were locked down for more or less a year out of that 2020-2021 period. So what started as a crisis response, moving everyone to online, then had to be sustained over time. The interesting thing about that is that there are some lasting lessons that came out of the back of that, which have turned into ongoing cultural and practical practice changes. And they're going to stay with us indefinitely because the way people work, live and study has changed. And so we're changing in response to that. So Deakin had a fair amount of experience in online learning. What we did through the pandemic was we brought those two things together. So now when we think about online and on-campus learning, we're really thinking about a smorgasbord, a banquet, if you like, of strategies to choose from. And how do we choose? Well, my advice to my colleagues is twofold. First of all, choose the mode that suits the learning that you want to achieve. If you're going to teach data visualization, you're going to be online. If you're going to teach something like client interactions, you're probably going to do it in a classroom in a clinical environment, or you might be doing it online as well because we do so much teleconsulting now. So you might want both of those environments to use. If you're doing something in a specialist space or in the field, you need to be there. So that's going to be on site. And if you're building skills, and I'm sure we'll come to this more as we go through, then you're going to build them in different ways depending on which mode you're working with. If you want to build teamwork skills with students in a classroom, that's a very different approach to doing it online. Doesn't mean that you can't do it online, but you're going to do it in a different way. So the first rule is choose what's right for the learning outcome that you want. The second rule is think about what's best for the learner. So if you've got a lot of learners in your classroom that are part-time, have lots of caring or work responsibilities, are juggling study alongside other things, they will appreciate and respond to more flexibility. If you've got a classroom which is full of school leavers who've been in a school environment for a long time, they need a different sort of scaffolding. So again, you're choosing the mode which suits the learners in front of you and helping them to develop their skills. In the end, we use online and on-campus delivery both in parallel, because that still happens, but also intertwined to get the best outcomes, the best learning outcomes, both for the learning itself, but also for the learners who are joining us. Thanks, Frida.
Excellent, Liz. So you mentioned about the mode of delivery depending upon the learning outcomes and what the learner wants. So Professor Arsi, you also initiated the online learning at IIIT Bangalore long time back, before COVID. So what was your experience, and has it changed? What is the leadership thinking at IIITB regarding online programs?
Thank you, Professor Sridhar, and it's indeed a pleasure to be speaking in this forum. Indeed, see, at IIIT Bangalore, we did have a relatively small online presence even prior to COVID. But the primary difference was that it was a completely separate setup, not drawn away from our regular on-campus activities. So when COVID showed up, and then we had to embrace a lot of new things which were completely new to both to the faculty as well as the students. But a few things did help us. For example, all our traditional classroom settings were already quote unquote smart in some sense, in the sense that all of us were already used to teaching using slides, using audiovisual equipment, and so on. And so that part of it, as far as the preparation for the instruction delivery, was kind of taken care of. So in that sense, it was only a question of identifying a suitable platform and quickly moving a faculty into that particular platform. The second natural advantage we had was that we were an IT institute. So to that extent, there was relatively less challenge with respect to getting the teachers use these online platforms, and also this onboarding the students as well. So more or less, a lot of things were already in place. It was just a question of turning the switch on and then activating them. So that part of it was we were lucky to be able to quickly do that. But one additional unique dimension in the Indian context I would like to point out are that the higher education system in India is highly regulated, right? So which means there are, while we are free to do, IIIT Bangalore is a deemed university, which means we have pretty much lots of powers and autonomy. Nevertheless, there are these regulatory authorities which keep telling us, saying that, all the way from when should admissions be done to, when should classes start. And so those administrative challenges were there, right? So normally the academic year really got delayed and postponed. In fact, it took us nearly 3 years to come back to our regular cycle. There was a time when we were running 4 parallel cohorts, for each with a different calendar and so on. But when we were coming back, right? So to the traditional classroom teaching on campus, the campus got opened. So there also, what we did was, we didn't do it as a complete switch from online to on campus. So we did lot of for a significant nearly 2 semesters we did in hybrid mode, which means that we had students sitting in the classroom and there were students sitting online and attending the same class. So this is where our classrooms already enabled with audio visual equipment and video equipment and so on, that really helped. So we were seamlessly be able to know, we went completely online to hybrid, and now we have come back to 100% on campus. So one interesting thing is that yes, like the way it changed many things forever. So there were many of the practices that we introduced during that online phase. We continue it even till this date, right? For example, our the online platforms that we used have the ability to record the sessions. So now we have continued with that particular practice so that students, no, they got used to being able to watch the recordings any number of times for review and so on. So they requested that we continue that particular practice, and which we do even today. So that is something that as a practice we have been doing. And the other aspect of it, which we have previously, when we were doing online during the COVID time, we did have the option of both synchronous and asynchronous aspects of it. That now for our on-campus programs, the asynchronous part of it essentially comes more for a review, but we don't do any delivery directly in the asynchronous mode. So these are some of the some of the things that we did, and some of the things which has still remained with us, and we seem to be the students also seem to be liking it, and yeah, I think so. We're kind of going along all right.
Good, good. So you mentioned 2 points. 2 points. Definitely, one is with respect to digitalizing the classroom so that they can enable both online as well as in-person on-campus programs suitably well, and probably be equipped to deliver courses in hybrid mode at any time. So that's a very valid point, and also suits the theme of this particular webinar. The second important point that you said is about tech students. Tech students, it was less challenging for you to administer, for example, any kind of online program through a tech platform. So I would like to turn to Padma now, because Padma is heading the teacher education program at Tata Institute of Social Sciences. So she deals with a lot of social sciences program, right? So mainly we talk about STEM programs being offered online. So are there any specific challenges, especially during the COVID pandemic, on conducting social science programs, right, which includes a lot of connectivity, social togetherness, and things like that? So can you explain your experience, Padma?
Yeah, a couple of things which are relevant in the TISS context. One is that, of course, we are immersed in social sciences and take multidisciplinary perspectives, which means that students are learning both disciplines and ways of thinking, which they haven't studied in their undergraduate education typically. And the second is that a lot of our work is actually to prepare professionals for the field as practitioners of applied social sciences. So developing skills, practices, perspectives are also very central to our work. Way back in 2005, we actually experimented with integrating ICT into social science teaching because we felt we needed to reach a learner group which wasn't going to be able to come onto campus in a full-time capacity. And we actually were early adopters of Moodle. And we found it gave us affordances like pacing learning, keeping in touch with your learners even when they're off campus. But it was very valuable that we chose a blended approach. We brought students onto campus initially for a deep immersion, to build relations, to build perspective, and build this community, which would continue online. And it actually has worked. Over the years, we've found how to make and retain these communities of learners. They interact with each other as much as they interact with the faculty. And I think both these directions of interaction are very essential to kind of build into an online system. We also learned the value of using the flexibility that the online can provide along with structure, because in the absence of structure, the flexibility actually becomes something that students cannot manage. Probably this is a principle that applies not only to the social sciences, but generally across the board.
But a third aspect, which was very unique to the social sciences, which we felt we could leverage, is the fact that students go back to their context. And then they're able to engage with the content of the course from their context and bringing that context into the classroom. It actually means that you have to structure discussions on the discussion forum to actually prompt students to bring in their experience. But it also makes the teaching learning process actually quite demanding, because everything the student contributes is something that a faculty needs to respond to. And we learned very early that if you don't respond, students lose interest. So the active engagement of the teacher all the time through the forum is a very key learning that we took away. Subsequently, we have also experimented with using technology to build large-scale communities and do teacher professional development for in-service teachers in large scale and in under-resourced contexts. And from this, we have learned that especially not all learners are ready for the ICT engagement, but they learn very fast, provided they have the support. And this has been an extremely important learning for us. They find ways to even go to internet cafes and figure it out. But the learning offering has to be asynchronous, and it has to be available to them offline as well. It cannot be just, Zoom classes all the time. We cannot imitate the in-classroom experiences in this online mode, and we've learned that. We've also learned that good design and pacing are very central to make the experience work, which means that unlike spontaneous classroom teaching, we actually have to think well in advance. We can't spontaneously make changes once you have launched a course. And this is actually far more demanding on faculty. And it has to be factored into preparation for this modality as well. We've also learned how to build communities of teachers using mobiles. The one discomfort we have is that it seems to privatize all the costs of engaging with the online, because you're doing it on your own data, your own device, your own time. But on the other hand, we are at least figuring out how to make these work. And we've been thinking that scale should also be thought as an input into design. It should not only be something you achieve once you've developed good design and then, good curriculum, but you should see how can you leverage variation in participation, variation in contexts as you scale with larger and larger. And the last thing is that skill building and especially teaching is very practice-based. And you have to take your learning into the context in which you actually teach. We've found that we can use ICT to build this kind of learning practice, learning cycle, the learning practice reflection cycle into the online experience. And these, I think, are learnings that we actually brought into our institute on a much larger scale when COVID hit us. We were well ready with some of the thinking that needs to infuse the development of an online system. And TSS was one of the earliest institutes in the country to transition into COVID. We knew we had to induct teachers, we had to induct staff, administrative staff. We had to offer teachers a sandbox in which they could experiment and develop their own skills. I think we didn't do enough because I think eventually many people still resorted to using Zoom like a classroom substitute. We could have done a lot more. But I think the whole effort of just coping, staying on the ball, trying to meet all that credit load, really we lost this opportunity to operationalize many more of these principles. But I think, administration also has to factor in that it's time consuming to teach online. It's just because it's not visible in the physical space, it doesn't mean that it's actually not occupying people. And I think the point about regulation is so important. We've learned that it's very unreasonable to expect in the online mode people to be pursuing 4, 5, 6 courses simultaneously, like you juggle a timetable in an on-campus program. We should be allowed to offer things modularly in trimester models with much greater flexibility. And I think really regulation should adapt to these kinds of possibilities. Last point, a lot of my colleagues who were skeptics about the online actually figured out that there are far more affordances today than there were even 5 years ago. And there are possibilities along with the challenges.
Okay, thank you, Padma. So a couple of things. Liz also mentioned about, choose the mode that gives the maximal learner outcome. And you also mentioned about some of the challenges in measuring outcome in an online classroom environment. So, Vitomir, you've been working on learning analytics for quite some time. Your research focuses on, finding out the best learning analytics using technologies such as AI. So, what is your view on the whole outcome, the learner's experience and outcome in online learning, and how do you measure that? Is there any measurement available? Can it be compared to, for example, in-person on-campus programs? So what is your view on this based upon your research?
Thanks a lot. So basically, actually, in many ways, online is easy to capture engagement rather than face-to-face. And the reason why is because people...
Vitamur, your voice is a little bit soft, so if you can just speak over the mic.
Let me try that a bit. Maybe my Zoom. Yes, that's Zoom thing. Is it now better?
Yes, better now. Yeah.
Yes. So the main thing about online settings is actually often it's easier to do analytics and collect the measure engagement data because students use these platforms, and then we can get insights into if somebody logs in at 10 p.m. you check the course and do something and watch a video or post a discussion post, whatever that might be. We have the record of that, so it's actually often easier in an online environment. Now, all of that you need to consider, of course, the course design. What activities are being designed, what activities haven't been designed, and so on. So that's where the trick with analytics is. It's very hard to build something that's very generic and applies to all the courses and all the possible designs. You have to consider that students do different things in different courses, and they should be doing, as Liz was saying, pick the mode and the set of activities and approach that works for a particular domain. And that's that thing. And depends also how accurate data you can get. So if you can collect the data about student watching videos, what does it tell you about students? What you can infer from that, and so on. Can you make reliable estimate on their engagement, their learning progress, and so on? So often the best approach is to actually integrate analytics as part of your course design. So you're thinking about, okay, I'm designing this course, I'm having, teaching intro to finance. Okay, I'm going to have this set of activities. They will produce the data for me. They will take a look then at the end of the week one to see who hasn't been engaging. I'm going to then trigger this intervention, do that, and so on. But you need to kind of design activities in a way that will produce you this data. Right? If this is the evidence-centered approach you want to adopt, that you have the data that will drive your intervention. In classrooms, we usually don't need that because the fact that students are in the classroom is providing us enough data that as teachers we engage, we see who is sitting on their phone and on Facebook and who's actually doing activity. That's what teachers do. But there is, of course, the limit of that, how big the classroom can be, how big up to 25, 30 people max. That's what a reasonable you can reasonably expect from a instructor to manage. And in online environments, we can have higher and bigger cohorts, and of course bring more flexibility what students need. All of those things that we've been discussing. So definitely, there's like I said, the pitfall with trying to have a generic form of analytics, and especially that can come from existing tech platforms that try to build analytics, because we use them in different ways. For example, Teams, I'm not sure exactly do they actually have it or not, but I remember being discussions of meeting engagement analytics. So that's fine in certain cases, but certain Zoom meeting, it might be a lecture, in which case you are expected to be quiet and listen. And sometimes there will be a group discussion between 5 teammates, 5 students, in which case it's true, you want everybody to contribute evenly, right? So and you can't just have a generic metric that you're going to just slap on top of all the course designs and expect. That's a really big problem, because then you'll get academics chasing meaningless numbers and everybody trying to just pretend to do something because analytics are telling them those things. So that's really a big problem. Now, with face-to-face and online, what we really want to do is, and that's a really more recent development in analytics, is combining the data from face-to-face environments. So, for example, having classroom cameras or any other different classroom devices that will give us data that we can then combine meaningfully. So if we have, I don't know, arts class, design workshop, and things like that, we're not going to have any data from that. So in that case, we want to utilize these modern technologies to collect the data. Then we can then use on their own or combine with if there are certain online components, and usually are these days. Rarely any. There are pretty much no face-to-face courses anymore. It's either blended or fully online. But I don't think I've seen just a face-to-face course for a long time. So yeah, that's on that hand.
Excellent, Vitamir. So you correctly pointed out the various challenges in measuring outcomes, especially in the online program, and also using technologies for in-person programs as well. So excellent point. We'll come back to that later. So meanwhile, I'll go back to Liz and RC. See, both of you have mentioned about regulation of the EdTech sector. So in general, the regulation always lags behind technology, as we all know, and therefore the regulators always want to provide rules which provide level playing field between online program and in-person program. And sometimes they don't allow the flexibility that is actually provided by the technology, but cannot be, mandated, and so on. So what is your view, Liz, about the regulatory landscape in the EdTech sector in Australia?
Thanks, Sridhar. So regulation of universities in Australia is held by the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency, big mouthful, but we just call it TEQSA. And they are guided by the TEQSA Act, which includes our higher education standards. Now, interestingly, the higher education standards are mode agnostic. They don't actually talk about how to do teaching and learning. They are outcomes based. They talk about outcomes. They talk about adequate provision of information to students, and adequate oversight of what they do and what's provided to them. And then they talk about outcomes. They surprisingly talk very little about delivery. But interestingly, the other bit, the sort of the unseen regulation here is actually the funding model. So the funding model is very complex in Australia, but about bit under 50%, around 45%, is directly coming for tuition from the federal government. And their setup makes assumptions about how you're going to deliver. And those assumptions pervade all the delivery and the interaction with government. And I'll give you two examples, a negative one and then a very positive one. So we have a national student engagement survey. This is done nationally every year, and it collects information from students in their first and third years of study. And the idea is to monitor the experience of students at Australian universities. That instrument has recently been revised, but it was only very recently that they revised what's called the Learner Engagement Scale, which is a series of questions about students' experience of being in a classroom. The prior version was heavily biased towards on-campus delivery, and it was very hard for online learners to give a good description of their interaction, which meant that for many years, that survey rated online courses far lower than it did on-campus courses. Now, that's relatively recently, though, that instrument's changing, and we are seeing a bit more parity there. But it meant that for quite some time, that was, while the rhetoric is about the equivalence of modes and being mode agnostic, the reality of the measurement instrument was actually discriminatory, and it meant that it was hard to get good quality data out of it. And Vitamir knows more about this than I do. But the good example is when you flip that on the head and the regulator tackles it head on. And one thing that TEQSA has done really well recently is to work with the sector on the impact of generative artificial intelligence tools as they've rolled out since the end of 2022. They've been around for a long time, of course, but they became mainstream kind of in a rush with the release of ChatGPT. And the following over 18 months now, 20 months, has been just a flood of product after product after product after product. So what TEQSA did, what the regulator did this time, which was clever, was they partnered with the sector. So they partnered with experts in the sector And they spent time to build awareness. They did this through national forums, through funding activities. They produced resource guides. And then they capped that all off with, we've only just submitted this, they required every university to prepare an action plan about what they were going to do about the impact of generative AI. So there is a regulator responding to a difference, a new mode, and they're responding positively and collaboratively and creating resources which actually help institutions to navigate the change. They're not trying to dictate the solution. They're trying to build the solution in partnership with institutions. And of course, that's a really productive way to go about it.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. So, I mean, you've correctly pointed out that in Australia, I think the collaborative approach between the regulators and the experts in the sector have started, and it is in progress, as you have mentioned, and it seems to be getting some traction. But what about India? So, RC, can you throw some light on how the regulators are viewing this whole online education and digital classrooms?
Right. Yes, indeed. I would answer that in a couple of ways, right? I think one thing which became very apparent, and as I say, there was no other way to look at it post-COVID, that online education was here to stay, right? So to give credit to the regulators, they quickly realized that they have to do something about it, right? So that is something that's a very positive thing that has happened in the Indian regulatory system. And so what they did was that for the online programs, so they created a completely different set of guidelines and rules. So which is a good thing, because the way, as we all are discussed, right? So there are many of the things which are unique and different when it comes to online delivery and so on, right? Scale and all that stuff. So that is the good part about the way Indian regulatory systems reacted to online education. What they also did was they gave enough funding and support to create online resources, right? So just prior to COVID, so we used to have a large online platform which we call as the NPTEL, right? It's a national, it's a platform for technology-enabled education, right? So they created, but that was primarily focused on engineering education or technical education, as we call it. But subsequently, that also was expanded to what we call as the Swayam portal, which goes beyond these engineering courses and programs. So that is the one very positive thing. So as a side effect of that, in the Indian education space, we used to have they created a completely different set of rules for online education, as opposed to what used to be called as open university. So open university as a concept has been there for very long, except that the delivery of open university education was primarily through the postal system, right? So the printed books used to be sent via post and so on. So that aspect also got quickly adapted to the online mode. So these are some of the very positive things that the Indian regulatory authorities quickly reacted to, and they've created these systems with which we can successfully deliver online programs which are legal and compliant with the regulations and so on. Now, having said that, I would like to submit that it is still a little bit of a work in progress when it comes to getting the online model right. Okay, so they are still trying to figure out which aspects of it is okay to do to permit in the online mode. And as Liz also earlier pointed out, right, it depends upon what is it that you want to teach, the kind of course and so on. So at a national level, and they are still trying to figure out what is allowed and what is not allowed. And in fact, I would rather have them do it in a more liberal way, but actually they are being a lot more conservative. So especially in the technical education, we are having to prove over and over again that not all tech education necessarily needs to be done in campus, in-person mode. It is okay to do it in online. So that transition is happening slowly. Previously, for example, they used to have very strict program saying that any degree which has got this term called engineering in its name is not allowed online. I mean, they had their point that engineering involves working with machines, tools, and things like that. But then we do have lots of engineering disciplines which don't necessarily require physical infrastructure. So these are some of the things that these are still evolving and evolving in a positive way. So hopefully we will have more and more programs and types of programs that can be offered in the online space. So I think things are improving a lot, actually.
Thank you. Thank you, Arsi. So we have some limited time. Then after that, we'll open it up for audience. There's a last question from me. So we have always been saying that online education is going to bridge the divide, educational divide, right? So Padma also mentioned about, for example, teaching online programs in a resource-constrained environment. So we cannot hope that everyone will have mobile broadband and will be able to seamlessly log into online courses. So your final words from all the panelists on how and whether at all this online education is bridging the education divide and taking the education to rural and underserved areas of the respective countries, India and Australia. So first, over to you, Liz, on Australia.
Sridhar, it's critically important for Australia. As I said, Deakin's mission in the beginning was distance learning, and we were established, as a number of other Australian universities were, to provide education out to regions and remote regional spaces. And there are some pretty remote places in Australia. So regional provision is really important. But the other thing to remember is that when people can't or find it difficult to study, it's not always distance that's the problem. It might be that they simply can't travel to a university. They have a disability, or they have many of them, probably the most common reason for not being able to get to a campus is actually caring or work responsibilities. So we have people that are studying with us online who might live within a kilometre of a campus, but what they need is the flexibility. This is critically important for Australia, and it's become even more acute post-pandemic because people can now work from home. They expect to be able to study from home as well, and so all Australian higher education providers are looking at this. Most of them, as Vitamir said before, there are no courses in Australia which are only face-to-face. Everybody will have an online presence for their course. The question is how does that blend work? And in many cases, the only way for it to work for that particular learner is for it to be fully online, either synchronous with synchronous pieces in it or not. So critically important for Australia, critically important to upskill a workforce where you've got people caring, working, and in an era of really rapid technological change where you need existing workers to upskill, it becomes even more important.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz. So Vitamir, what does your research tell us about taking online programs to remote and underserved areas and things like that?
Yes. So that's definitely an important bit, and actually in many ways online and distance education was really driven by the need to support people from remote areas. That's why, for example, Canada was always in the front of that, and Australia as well, because they're quite remote places that almost there's no possible to serve. Just give you one example. There is a school, just in a school setting, that in Northern Territories, they have a catchment area bigger than the whole state of Victoria, and it's bigger than Italy. So imagine a school having a catchment zone bigger than a whole, pretty sizable country. The places like that, and of course we have to serve those students, and that's where actually online can be quite beneficial. For example, being able to engage with others who are interested in similar topics, and there is no local community, right? And that's a very, very beneficial in allowing people to connect with other learners, other people interested in similar topics, similar to learn and develop further. Of course, the issue of digital divide and access is a really substantial one. First of all, the technological access, the connection issues, having a computer, but also even the place to study. Some people have, you're sharing your single laptop with your siblings. So that's, we often, when we're designing this program, assume that the students will have uninterrupted access to all of that, and also uninterrupted place for to listen for an hour and a half Zoom lecture or whatever. So things like that, and that's a very, very big assumption. Also, if students are primarily using the mobile devices rather than laptops, for example, as common is in some of developing parts of the world, like in Africa, for example, mobile is the primary device rather than a laptop, and that's then you need to consider how are you designing the learning materials, all of those things for consumption through a mobile rather than 22 inch screen, right? So those are really really big constraints, and in many ways online we don't have a good solution for that, because it's really assumed by the way these courses are designed. You can put certain provisions, such as having a material design in a certain way, or having multiple options to connect, whether you just phone line and whatnot and so on. But it's still it's very, very hard, and that's one of the big challenges of. But alternative almost doesn't exist, because if there's two students in a 500-kilometer area, there is no other option. So that's why I think we should be, as educators, just being aware of those things, being aware and trying our best to enable those students also.
So quick remarks, Padma, from you, being heading the teacher
I was
education
just
program.
I was thinking, in the Indian context, the multiplicity of Indian languages is a very important thing to embrace and recognize. Also, that given the low GERs that we actually have in higher education, a lot of people entering into the system are actually first generation entrants into higher education. So the kind of socialization practices that you need to be able to succeed in the higher education space are not available at the family level. So I think we should factor these in mind as we kind of imagine possibilities, and especially, given the kinds of divides in India. And I think digital learning has a very important complementary role to play to campus-based learning, increasing access to the kinds of things that you can learn once you're inside a higher education environment. Not only thinking that this is something that you do from your home, but it just opens up the bouquet of courses that you can study in a college where you are admitted. And I think there's a very important contribution that digital learning can make, even in the Indian context, where I think there's no substitute to having more campuses where students gain access to many of the core resources that enable higher education to succeed. Especially, we all know that it's not just content, it's the socialization, it's the social networks. All these really contribute to converting higher education experience into a life empowering, future for young people. So I think that should be kept in mind, and a complementary approach is what I think would succeed in the Indian context.
Thank you, Padma. RC, your views quickly, please.
Yeah, sure. I think the biggest strength of online education is the anytime, anywhere learning. And I think so that is something that we have to leverage as every speaker before me pointed out, we have to leverage it in a responsible manner, right? And I think Professor Padma also alluded to the GER, the gross enrollment ratio. And so at most, if we want to reach the target of 50% or whatever larger number, online education is the way to go. So having said that, I also have a very strong view that online is not the way to go for lower education standards. I think one of the biggest disservice, if you ask me, we did during the COVID time is to place mobile phones in the hand of third graders, right? So that is something that is that should not be the way to go forward. And at best, we can try it at a higher education. And by all means, right? So continuous learning, I think that's definitely the only way to do that. So yeah, I think that's my view.
Thank you. So we have some questions from the audience. There is a question which is addressed to the panel, or any of the panel members can respond to that. What digital tools you consider most valuable in the suite of tools that you use? What LMS system do you use? Do you have your own student app to be used for learning? What collaborative tools? It's a very big question. So, but in general, I mean, probably RC and Vitamir can just tell a brief overview of what tools and technologies that we can use for effective online learning. Vitamir?
So, usually, I mean, at least at UniSA, we use typically the common standard set of tools that are available within the learning management system that we use. That's Moodle in our case. So we are soon, because of the pending merger with the Adelaide University, going to be Canvas. Also, however, we have, and that's an interesting, given my area of research in educational technologies, developing additional tools that we are using. For example, one of the most successful one that we use is called OnTask, and I'll put the link down below. It's essentially an automated feedback automation tool that will allow students, teachers to write personalized feedback messages that get triggered, sent to students based on certain parameters. Think of like a mail merge for student messaging, right? To write a specific feedback message and, hey, I notice you got high score on the exam. However, you haven't studied until the 3 days before. Maybe you should try do this and that. And those kinds of messages that are really personalized, that it's really bringing the teachers would do that just to improve and make that fast. It's an open source tool, by the way, so you can use that. Things such as that, where we have a lot of that in educational research when the new and more innovative technologies are being developed. Big, I think, problem is that majority of places eventually end up with the technologies from a specific tech provider, such as whether it's Microsoft or it's Google or whoever else. And often the problem, I think, is that they're not really designed with the pedagogy in mind. Often companies are too big and they provide one solution for everybody, and it's your problem to adapt to them rather than they want to adapt to you. And that's especially, for example, the issues like Padma mentioned, multiple languages. That's a fantastic example. How is the technology allowing you to solve that problem? You don't have that problem in US as you might have in India, and the company from Silicon Valley won't take that seriously now because that's not their mindset where they're coming from. So that's really, I think, the big pitfall is fully relying on technology provider rather than having your own internal capacity to modify those tools and integrate certain extensions that you might need, whether it's a multi-language or remoteness or whatever the problem you're dealing with, because tools are usually done in a way to optimize sales, not to optimize your pedagogical needs.
Fine. Vitamir. So I go back to RC. So he has been dealing with EdTech providers for quite some time. Are there any suite of tools that you can recommend?
Yeah, in fact, I think Vitamir brought up several important aspects of it. So I would, instead of naming the tools, I would recommend, at least whenever I look at technology for online education, I look at 3 aspects of it, right? So it's delivery capabilities and it's engagement capabilities. And the third thing, which nobody brought up, which is probably a difficult topic to talk about, is assessments. And so these are the three aspects of it, so again, there are whole plethora of tools that are out there, but I think if we look at the tools on all these three aspects of it, and because once again, right, it has to be contextualized to the institution as to what they want. For example, if you just take the delivery part of it, right? So if you are talking about the delivery part of it, and the video becomes a very important part of it, and whether it is going to be live synchronous delivery versus recorded videos, and engaging with that. So again, when it comes to engagements, right? So he talked about personalization, right? So that becomes a very important element of it. And of course, assessments. I have graduated 2 PhD students on assessments using education technology. I still haven't found a solution. I think that's probably, if you ask me, that's the Achilles heel of online education. There's a lot to be done, but things are improving. And so depending upon, because that also may determine, for example, an institution may feel that the technology is not good enough for me to go with assessment. So you can just look at the other 2 dimensions and choose your tools and providers. Yeah.
Thank you, Arsi. So Priya has a question to all the panelists. Do you want to come on board, Priya? Your question?
Thanks so much. It's a really, really fantastic discussion, and I don't know if we'll be able to get an answer from all of you in the remaining 2 minutes. But I was just curious because each one of you gave examples of how you all were almost already prepared for this kind of online thing to sort of start it. But each of you come at it from a different angle. Like, for example, Liz, you came from talking about Deakin as distance education, and then RC, you talked about how you guys are already doing certain things, and Vitomir talked also about, distance education. So I was just, and so did Padma. But I'm just curious to know if there were any kinds of lessons that you could draw from that, school, radio schools on air, and, the old forms of open university, distance education. Were there anything that you could learn from that became useful in your transition to online? That's like a big question, but I just thought I'd put it out there to talk about later on.
Priya, and this may be a closing question as we are running out of time. So we can send it to all the participants or the panelists. The panelists can respond to that. So Liz, over to you.
So in a nutshell, Priya, I think the advantage of interacting with distance education over a long period of time is actually cultural. It's about thinking about your learners as though they're not going to be with you, they're going to be somewhere else. So you've got to guide them in a different way. So there's a cultural thing here about thinking about your teaching in a different way. So do the nuts and bolts of it matter? Well, all practice helps. But I think it's the cultural shift that really matters. And the thing about COVID was it disrupted the norm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
In fact, I can weigh in for 30 seconds, Sridhar, if you don't. See, specifically, one of the learnings I would say is, I think somebody already pointed out that we need to be a lot more organized, and the old school, right? So distance education and things like that. Only you have to be well organized. I think that is probably a very important thing that we carried forward in the online space.
Ma?
I think what we carry forward is that there is need and value, and we should find out how to make it succeed and not come up with low quality models. I think that has been a motivating force.
Vitomir?
One thing I got from the previous work in the area is that you really need to have a very good plan for introducing technologies. Just providing something won't make it happen. Just the way if you get, I'm just going to put discussions in my course and hoping the students will do that. No, they won't. They will do only things they need and that see the life. So if you put certain, for example, analytical dashboard, engagement dashboard, often what will happen, staff will just log in once, they will see a bunch of numbers that have a clue what they represent, what they mean, and they will close it off. They won't know the link anymore, they will forget how to log in, and nobody will ever use it. So we have a lot of experience with building stuff nobody's using, because that's how, and it's not integrated into their practice. So if you want to build something like you say, our goal is to increase engagement by 10%, whatever that is. And then in order to do that, oh, that's very hard. So I built a dashboard to help you. So now you're using that, whether you're going to use it or not, you have this goal that you need to achieve. And people will say, okay, if this is helping me solve the goal, now I see the value of it. Just saying, we're going to provide this dashboard to you without, or any tool, without thinking about how that integrates, they won't use it and it will go nowhere.
Thank you. So Priya, you got the answer from all of them.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much. I mean, my sincere gratitude to all the panelists for taking time off and spending the valuable time for this 1 hour of very, very interesting discussions. And thanks to the audience for attending today's forum on the digital classroom and leadership perspective. Hope we have got a lot of inputs from the experts, and we will synchronize it all together. So today's session has been recorded and it will be made available on the Australia India Institute website. I'll also tell the audience and as well as the panelists to register for our next forum, which will be our third and final webinar on generative AI, rethinking learning futures, which will be held on the 18th of July. You can find the link to register. The link has already been posted in the chat box. Request all of you to promote this particular event. Thank you very much on behalf of Australia India Institute at the University of Melbourne and the International Institute of Information Technology, Bangalore. We are thankful to all of you for attending and making a productive discussion in this particular webinar. Thank you very much.